The ancient piece of linen, now on public view at Turin Cathedral, bears the outline of a crucified bearded man. Believers say it was used to wrap the body of Jesus after his crucifixion.
A Jewish atheist walked into a cathedral in 1978 to prove the most sacred relic in Christianity was a fake. He spent the next 46 years trying to find a single piece of evidence that would let him walk away. He never found it. What he found instead is the reason you are watching this video, and it has nothing to do with faith. And now, what the science actually shows is something entirely different. The man who came to disprove everything. In 1978, a team of 33 scientists was assembling to examine the Shroud of Turin, the 14-foot linen cloth that millions of people believed had wrapped the body of Jesus Christ after crucifixion. The team came from Los Alamos National Laboratory, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratories, and the Air Force Academy. They needed one photographer with absolutely no emotional stake in whatever the data showed. And someone on the team thought of Schwartz. He tried to refuse twice. He told the team leader directly that he had no business getting involved with the most important relic in Christianity. A NASA imaging scientist named Don Lin looked at him and said, "Have you forgotten that the man in question was also a Jew?" Then he added 5 words that Schwartz would carry for the rest of his life. "God does not tell us in advance." He packed his equipment and flew to Turin. Within the first hour of examining the cloth, his instruments showed him clearly that the image on the surface was not a painting. But knowing what something is not is a very different thing from understanding what it actually is. And in those first hours, there was one detail that stopped him completely and would keep him skeptical for 17 more years. The blood on the cloth was red, not brown and not black, but red. Ancient blood does not stay red because hemoglobin oxidizes over time, and the color breaks down entirely. Blood sitting in a European cathedral for centuries is not red. This blood was, and that single observation was enough to hold back the most skeptical man on the entire research team from accepting what every other piece of evidence was beginning to build toward. He looked at his colleague Vern Miller, and they both shook their heads at the same moment, and both of them understood that whatever this cloth turned out to be, the explanation would have to account for blood that simply did not age the way blood was supposed to age. The explanation for the red blood wouldn't reach Barry Schwartz for another 17 years. But the investigation kept pointing back to a moment 80 years earlier, when an amateur photographer captured an image that seemed to break a fundamental law of photography. The night photography broke its own rules. On May 28, 1898, an amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was granted permission by King Umberto, the first to photograph the Shroud of Turin during a royal exhibition at the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin. Photography in 1898 required hauling a camera the size of a suitcase onto scaffolding inside the cathedral, igniting violent magnesium flashes to illuminate the cloth, and exposing large glass plates by hand in complete darkness. Late that night, alone in his dark room, lit only by the faint red glow of a safety lamp, Pia lowered the first plate into developing chemicals and waited for the image to appear. As it materialized on the glass, he nearly dropped it. On any photographic negative, without a single exception anywhere in the history of photography, everything reverses. Light areas become dark and dark areas become light. Human faces become distorted, hollow, and unrecognizable. The shroud broke it entirely. What appeared on Pia's negative was not a distortion, but a portrait. A sharp, anatomically precise face, with eyes gently closed. A broken nose, bruising along the right cheek, a forked beard, and an expression of complete calm on a person who had clearly endured extreme suffering. It looked like a modern photograph of a living human being, not like the negative of something painted onto medieval cloth 8 centuries earlier. The reason this matters can be stated precisely. The image on the shroud itself is already a negative. A negative of a negative produces a positive. The positive portrait that appeared on Pia's plate was proportionally accurate, anatomically correct, and more detailed than anything any known artistic method could explain. In February 1976, Air Force physicists John Jackson and Eric Jumper fed a photograph of the Shroud into a VP-8 image analyzer, a Cold War device built for mapping planetary surfaces from satellite data that converts image brightness into three-dimensional terrain.
This is the VP-8 image analyzer. Now, that was a software system developed, three-dimensional characteristics of X-rays.
They had already tested dozens of ordinary images through it, and every one had produced meaningless shapes because brightness in a photograph represents reflected light and not physical distance. The Shroud produced a perfect three-dimensional human body, with every surface contoured correctly and image intensity at every point matching the calculated distance between the cloth and the body beneath it. Peter Schumacher, the engineer who built the machine, had no religious background and no stake in any outcome. He described the results as unlike anything he had ever seen come through the analyzer before or since. In nearly 50 years, no image has matched this result. Analysis showed the linen contained 3D spatial data beyond pre-20th century technology, and after 3 years of testing by 33 scientists, it led to an extremely rare scientific conclusion: the image that outlasted molten silver. The Shroud of Turin research project published its formal conclusions in 1981 after 3 years of peer review. Researchers ruled out common explanations. The image was not a scorch from a heated statue, since burns fluoresce under ultraviolet light, and this image does not. It was not a vapor transfer either, as such processes create blurred, directionless stains without precise spatial detail. Instead, the image exists only on the outermost 200 nanometers of the linen fibers, thinner than a single bacterium. It is a chemical change where the cellulose on the fiber surface has been oxidized and dehydrated. The color is not painted on, but formed by rearranging atoms within the fibers themselves. Each fiber is either colored or not, creating a binary, half-tone effect similar to a newspaper image. There are no brush strokes, no flow patterns, and no evidence of liquid involvement. The image appears only on the topmost surfaces, not along the sides of fibers, suggesting a strictly vertical process. The final report included a rare conclusion: chemical explanations were ruled out by physics, and physical explanations were ruled out by chemistry. The method of image formation remained unknown, and still does. Later, ENEA attempted replication. Physicist Paolo Di Lazzaro used ultraviolet lasers to produce superficial coloring on small samples, but scaling it would require energy beyond current technology. Despite fires, damage, and centuries of study, the image endures. A $1 million challenge to replicate it remains unclaimed. Yet for Barry Schwartz, the real mystery was not the image, but the forensic evidence found in the blood itself. The blood that reversed every rule. Stirp chemist John Heller described the moment the spectral analysis confirmed hemoglobin in the blood samples taken from the cloth. He said the hair stood up on the back of his neck. The tests confirmed it was real blood, and not any kind of paint, ochre, or pigment. He and his colleague Alan Adler ran 12 independent diagnostic tests and confirmed hemoglobin, albumin, and heme porphyrin derivatives. They also found serum halos, which are the pale rings that form when blood separates as it dries on a surface. Serum halos are a forensic detail that no medieval painter would have known to include because the biological phenomenon producing them was not scientifically understood until the development of modern forensic medicine. Then there is the sequence that eliminates every forgery theory in a single observation. The blood was deposited on the cloth before the image formed. Underneath every blood stain on the shroud, there is no body image at all, and the image stops precisely at the edge of every stain without continuing beneath it. In every forgery and every work of art, across the entire history of human creativity, The creator renders the figure first and applies blood afterward. The shroud reverses this sequence entirely, with the blood arriving before the image. And that order alone eliminates painting, rubbing, printing, and every contact transfer method ever seriously proposed. Then there is the nail placement. The wounds pass through the wrists and not through the palms. Every painting of the crucifixion ever made shows nails through the palms.
Of the crucifix, the nails appear to be driven into the middle of Christ's hands, now in the Shroud of Turin.
But French surgeon Pierre Barbet proved through cadaver experiments in the 1930s that palm tissue cannot support a body's weight under crucifixion because the nails tear straight through. Crucifixion requires anchoring through the distort space between the wrist bones. Every time Barbet drove a nail through that space, the median nerve was severed and the thumb snapped violently inward against the palm, locking permanently once rigor mortis set in. If you count the fingers visible on each hand of the figure on the shroud, you count 4 and not 5, because the thumbs are folded into the palms in exactly the position Barbet described. No artist in history knew this, and every crucifixion painting ever made gets this detail wrong. All the evidence pointed one way, but one question remained. Why was the blood still red instead of black? The answer would come from a Jewish blood chemist, delivered in a single word over a phone call. The word that ended 17 years of doubt. The answer was bilirubin. Alan Adler, a leading expert on porphyrins, the core structures of hemoglobin, had spent years analyzing blood data from the 1978 examination of the Shroud of Turin. Bilirubin is produced when the liver breaks down red blood cells and is normally present only in small amounts. But under extreme trauma, severe torture, intense stress, and prolonged suffering, the body releases large quantities of bilirubin into the bloodstream. This excess bilirubin binds to hemoglobin and prevents the usual oxidation process. Normally, dried blood turns brown or black over time, but blood rich in bilirubin can remain red indefinitely. In simple terms, the chemistry of extreme suffering can preserve the color of blood for centuries. When Adler explained this in a single word over a phone call, Barry Schwartz later said it instantly shattered every doubt he had held for 17 years. Further evidence added another layer of mystery. The blood type identified on the shroud is AB, which also appears on the Sudarium of Oviedo, a separate cloth preserved in Spain. This smaller cloth, kept in the Cathedral of San Salvador, contains only blood stains and has a documented history going back to at least the 6th century. In 1075, it was publicly examined in the presence of Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile and Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, one of the most well-documented figures of medieval Spain. Modern analysis found striking correlations between the two cloths. Using imaging techniques, researchers identified dozens of matching points between the blood patterns on the sudarium and the facial wounds visible on the shroud. These similarities suggest both cloths may have covered the same individual. Two artifacts from different countries with separate historical records, yet sharing a matching blood type and wound patterns. Reproducing such consistency through forgery would require knowledge and coordination far beyond medieval capabilities. The test that was built on a repair patch. On April 21, 1988, samples cut from the Shroud of Turin were delivered to three of the world's most prestigious
Shroud of Turin. Is this the real burial cloth of Jesus?
radiocarbon laboratories. The University of Arizona, the University of Oxford, and ETH Zurich in Switzerland each received a portion of material taken from one corner of the cloth. The results returned within months. 1360 to 1390 CE medieval. The Nature paper carried 95% confidence. Oxford professor Edward Hall stood before reporters and told them that someone had simply gotten a bit of linen, faked it, and flogged it. He compared those who believed in the shroud to flat earthers, and the world moved on. but the protocol that produced that result had been stripped down before the test ever began. The original 1986 plan had called for 7 laboratories, multiple sample sites from different areas of the cloth, and blind testing supervised by 3 independent institutions. By the time negotiations ended, it had been reduced to 3 labs, 1 sample site, and 1 supervisor, the British Museum. That single sample came from the most heavily handled corner of the entire cloth, the corner gripped by clergy during public exhibitions for centuries, soaked in sweat, candle wax, incense smoke, and the oils of thousands of hands over hundreds of years. Los Alamos chemist Raymond Rogers had been Stirp's lead chemist in 1978. He was not a believer. When researchers proposed the sample had come from a medieval repair patch, Rogers called the theory ludicrous and set out to disprove it. Then he examined the actual threads. The carbon-dated sample contained cotton, specifically Gossypium herbaceum, woven into the linen and completely absent from every other part of the shroud. It was also coated with plant gum containing alizarin dye bonded with gum arabic, materials found nowhere else on the cloth. Medieval nuns repairing the shroud after the 1532 fire had woven new cotton threads into the original linen, dyed them to match the aged color, and used gum to make the repair invisible to the naked eye. The 3 most prestigious radiocarbon labs in the world had dated the repair patch, and not the original cloth. Rogers published his findings in Thermochimica Acta in January 2005. He died on March 8, 2005, 2 months after publication. For 30 years, the laboratories refused to release the raw data behind the test, turning away every researcher who asked. Then, in 2017, a French law graduate used British Freedom of Information law to extract 711 pages of measurements from the British Museum. And when those numbers were finally published in 2019, what they showed made the original result impossible to defend on its own stated terms. DNA, pollen, and the date. Science had to correct. Tristan Casabianca published his findings in 2019 in Archaeometry. Arizona alone had made 40 individual measurements during the 1988 test, not the 4 summarized in the original Nature paper. Different parts of the same small sample gave radiocarbon ages varying by 150 years across roughly 1 inch of cloth. The overall agreement index was 28% on a test that had publicly claimed 95% confidence. Shortly after the original announcement, 45 donors had contributed £1 million to endow a new chair at Oxford named after Edward Hall. And the first person appointed to that endowed position was the British Museum official who had supervised the carbon dating test. In 2015, geneticist Gianni Barcaccia published a study in Nature Scientific Reports. His team extracted dust from deep within the shroud's weave and sequenced the mitochondrial DNA. A French forgery from 1350 should have shown European DNA dominating the samples. A Jerusalem relic that never traveled should have shown Middle Eastern DNA dominating. Neither outcome occurred. Haplogroup H33 appeared in the samples, found almost exclusively among the Druze in the mountains of Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, whose genetic profile has remained virtually unchanged for thousands of years. Western European markers were present, consistent with centuries of handling by French and Italian clergy. Haplogroup L3 from East Africa, markers from the Indian subcontinent and from East Asia. The biological traces of 5 continents were encoded in the dust of 1 cloth. A forger working in 14th century France could not have assembled genetically identifiable material from 5 continents. Byzantine, Syrian, and Arabic historical sources document the shroud traveling from Jerusalem to Edessa, on the Silk Road, then to Constantinople, where every civilization of the ancient world converged for centuries, leaving microscopic biological traces with every touch. The DNA is a 2,000-year travel record written in molecules.
The Shroud of Turin And the great majority of them have concluded the Shroud is indeed 2,000 years old.
Swiss criminologist Max Frey and Israeli botanist Avinoam Danin identified pollen from 58 plant species on the cloth. The majority came from the Middle East and a corridor between Jerusalem and Jericho. One species dominated Gundelia tournefortii, a thorny desert thistle whose pollen made up nearly a third of all grains found and was concentrated around the head area of the figure. It blooms near Jerusalem in early spring during the season of Passover, and its concentration around the head is a botanical record of a crown of thorns preserved in pollen and invisible for 2,000 years. Barry Schwartz died on June 21, 2024, at age 77. He never converted and remained Jewish until the very end of his life. At his 2013 TEDx talk at the Vatican, he told the audience he truly believed only God would think to choose a Jewish man with no emotional attachment to Jesus, a total skeptic with a completely negative attitude, and put him on the team. Then he paused and said, "Is it not funny how God always picks a Jew to be the messenger? I am the messenger." Every word was backed by 46 years of following evidence wherever it led. The cloth sits today in Turin, behind bulletproof glass, sealed in climate-controlled argon, carrying blood still red after 2,000 years, an image no laboratory has replicated, DNA from 5 continents, pollen from a hillside near Jerusalem, a stitching technique from a fortress destroyed before the 1st century ended, and a carbon date built on a medieval repair patch with an agreement index of 28%. If any of this changes how you think about what settled science actually means, leave your thoughts in the comments. This conversation is far from over.